So, being a Durham native, what's your favorite local businesses,
Oh my
or you
gosh.
go to, or something you just
There
like to go
are
to?
there are so many. That's the problem. I don't think I could narrow it down to one. I think right now they're coming out of COVID or having the restrictions lifted. The big thing for me is all the wonderful restaurants and pubs and places out there to go and
Is there a
have
top
a
restaurant?
meal and
Top restaurant?
Top
oh my
restaurant?
gosh. Oh goodness, there's Fazio's, there's places like wherever is around your corner, any place that's local. There's a lot of places that just make good food, but then anything that has that offers entertainment, oh my gosh. Give me a live band on a in a pub any Friday night, and I am a happy girl. So I know Simcoe Street, Blues and Jazz Club. I think there's a place up there that's
Right. Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
really good. I know they've got bands going in on a regular basis now. I'm really, really excited about that. Um, Anywhere that's like that. I mean, that's kind of my passion.
So what myths are there when it comes to the expectation of a landlord having on a tenant? You and I have talked about this in the past, where we as agents throw in random clauses into an agreement
Yeah.
Yep.
that are not really enforceable.
Yeah. Oh gosh, we could do an entire session just on that alone. I think I've actually got a lease, or sorry, an agreement to lease that came across my desk as part of a tenant matter, and the agreement to lease had in the Schedule A, I think an additional 29 terms and conditions, and out of those 29, I think maybe 17 or 18 of them were completely void and unenforceable because they contradicted the Residential Tenancies Act.
An example? What example do you have?
When they say that this agreement shall be the only binding agreement between the parties, that's actually contravention of the act. No pet provisions are contravention of the act. You must. Oh gosh, there's a lot of them. The tenant is responsible for the first $100 worth of maintenance fees or
I see that all the time. Yeah.
Yep, no. The tenant is responsible for maintenance. Nope. There's a lot of them. Basically, anything that, in order to know what you can't do, you have to know what you must do. And one of the things front and center is that you cannot contract out of the act. So
Right.
anything that kind of sounds like you're trying to contract out of the act is going to be voidable or unenforceable.
So, if I'm a new landlord getting into the market, where could I start? Like, what would be the best bet?
I would highly recommend going to the Landlord Tenant Board website and reading absolutely everything that's available to you there. It's a huge resource. Can provide you with access to not only the act and the regulations under it, but also decisions that come out of the Landlord Tenant Board. It will also it can provide you with access to frequently asked questions like, can my landlord raise the rent? How much can my landlord raise the rent? And then there's a number of things about what you can and cannot do as a landlord, what you can file an application for, what kind of notices you can give your tenant, what those notices can have to look like. It's a huge, huge resource. And I think there's a lot of people that just don't know it's there. And I would hope that as realtors and as investors or people that involved in finance, that you push that because it's a huge, huge resource for your clients. And then maybe they may not need my services.
So when you say that in that 29-page document or 29 statement schedule that you saw,
Yep.
What are the responsibilities of a tenant? Because I'm hearing a lot from landlords saying, it's in COVID, they're not, they're paying bill things late. Like, what is their responsibility?
So the responsibility is to pay the rent, first and foremost. Pay the
Right.
rent, not trash the place, not to. There's a positive obligation on a tenant to refrain from causing undue damage to the rental unit.
Right.
So don't take a baseball bat to the walls, but also don't let your dog eat the walls. Um, and anything that doesn't qualify as sort of normal wear and tear on a property that is used not gently. We don't landlords can't expect the whole place to be covered in plastic and everybody walking around like that, oh my gosh, I might cause a scuff. But hardware, like really harsh wear, is something that the tenant is really responsible for, and it's legislated. It doesn't have to be in a Schedule A. It doesn't have to be in an agreement to lease. It's already there because the act says so.
So what are the remedies then? So if a landlord sees, excessive wear,
Mhm.
what remedies the landlord? Because the issue is that I'm hearing it
Yep.
in Riyadh too, probably
yeah.
more than I am. That tenants get away
I can
with
tell you
murder.
stories.
Tenants are terrible. Tenants are bad. How do you get the tenants to be responsible for what they've caused?
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page that not all tenants are bad. and not
Yeah,
all
yeah.
landlords are bad.
I'm not saying,
Um,
there's a
but-
small few.
But
Yeah.
in my business, because of what I do, I only see the bad and the worst of the worst.
Right.
Okay? And in my experience, the bad tenants never really meet up with the bad landlords. So there's always one good side and one bad side,
Yes.
or maybe there's somewhere in the middle. Both are a little bit not so great. So just want to clear that up. But when you've got a tenant that is causing undue damage, you need to be able to articulate what exactly it is that the damage is and why it's undue, why it's causing a problem. It could be that they're I don't know. It could be anything. They're letting their dog or their pets wreck the lawn. It could be that they are really hard on the flooring. They're tearing up the carpets. They're bashing in the walls. I've seen anything and everything. It also could mean that they're just not using the property the way it's supposed to be used. It's a rental property. It's where you are supposed to sleep and live and house your family. And that's kind of where it ends. So if a landlord finds out that tenant is causing undue damage to their property, there's a form for that. Anything to do with the landlord tenant board is form based. It's all based on the legislation, but they're basically, if there's a thing that needs to be done, there's usually a form for that. So in order to explain to a tenant what they're doing wrong and how to stop that, there's a form for that, and you just fill it out. And again, if you're at the Landlord Tenant Board website, you can look at the list of the forms, and they're named pretty aptly. How to, here's a form for how to evict a tenant or end a tenancy and get the tenant to pay the rent. Here's a form for tenant causing interference with the landlord's reasonable enjoyment of the property. That's kind of a catch-all for general undue damage. But
do both sides have to sign the form?
No. So the way the board works, the way the process works is that if you're a landlord and you want to tell your tenant that you want them to leave, basically you have to serve them with a notice. Okay, so the first step is to provide them with a notice, and the notice will say, on the face of it, is that this is a legal notice and you have rights, and read this very carefully. So the landlord would fill it out, and part of that process is making sure that the names of all the parties are there, the right addresses and everything are all there. And then they have to be able to explain to the tenant when, we use the phrase, or I use the phrase, when did who do what, when did who do what to whom and how. So you need to be able to articulate or put into words what the tenant's doing and why it's bad, so that you can explain to the tenant, you need to stop this. And then most of the time there is a sort of a grace period where the tenant is given an opportunity to either stop the bad behavior or in some way, whatever that behavior is. So if the tenant is, say you're in a condo and the tenant isn't putting the garbage down the garbage chute, they're letting it, build up in the unit. Well, the tenant needs to clean the unit and start putting the garbage where it needs to go. If the tenant is not doing, so in that case, the tenant was not doing something that they should be doing. If you've got a tenant that is doing something that they shouldn't be doing, then you have to be able to tell the tenant they have to refrain from doing the bad behavior and correct that. Usually there's a 7-day grace period that gives the tenant the opportunity to do that, in which time the landlord will be looking in to see if it's been corrected. If it has, then the notice is void. If it's not, then that gives the landlord an opportunity to pursue the matter in the landlord tenant board by filing an application based on the notice. Sounds a little bit complicated, but it's really not. As far as the process is concerned, drafting notices for 1 or 2 issues may be very easy, but they could also be very complex. So if you've got a tenant that's just, not cleaning up the dog poop, that may be fairly simple to articulate. If you've got a tenant that's causing massive problems, then I would suggest that a landlord seek out legal representation, or at least on a consultation basis, to figure out how complicated the matter is before they weigh in if they've never done this before.